There's very few video games out there that I've actually struggled to find the motivation to finish, but Perfect Dark Zero is definitely one of them. I still remember playing this way back in the day on my friend's Xbox 360 and giving up like 2 or 3 missions in. A decade or so later, I picked it up real cheap secondhand and tried to give it another go. Around the same time, my capture card decided to have a heart attack, which was more than a speed bump. This was kind of like hitting a brick wall at top speed. But this time I actually committed to finishing the whole thing. I dug out my dusty Xbox 360, I hooked up that Elgato capture card, and I sat down and dedicated an entire weekend to see the whole thing through. I usually try to do videos on things that I like to play, but I just spent so much of my spare time getting through this thing that it'd be a bit of a disservice to not do a video on it. Not to mention, people have been asking me about this one for years and what I think of it.
I'm sorry, Joanna. I gotta look after number 1.
So here it is. Perfect Dark Zero is not a good sequel, and I don't even really think it's all that good of a game.
You lost, little girl.
Developed by Rare and released exclusively for the Xbox 360 in 2005, around the same time that Rare got bought out by Microsoft. And there's no better example of this game feeling bought and paid for in the fact that there's a goddamn Samsung logo on the main menu. As a sequel to one of the most influential and innovative first-person shooters of all time, it's a major letdown. All of the grit from the original game's cyberpunk theme has been lost here, replaced by the most generic mid-2000s art style of all time.
Dark Zero, in position.
I still remember playing the original and being blown away at so many aspects, like the design for some of the weapons, the enemy animations, and the music. My god, the music. I think it had one of the best soundtracks for any Nintendo 64 game. It was one of those rare times, no pun intended, when a console shooter held its own against its PC counterparts. Was it perfect? No, it really wasn't. I mean, it had a dodgy frame rate and the controls were pretty crappy, but it's a timeless relic from that period in gaming and it still stands out as one of the most unique games ever made. The impact that it had on the genre was just undeniable.
Hey, looks like someone doesn't know when to quit. We've got to get everyone out.
If you emulate it on the PC with a mouse and keyboard, it's even better. Now, I know that mentioning emulation too many times is like saying Bloody Mary into a mirror at midnight, and before too long the console purist's gonna show up and tell you how wrong you are. But I think no better example of how solid the foundation of a game is can be seen when you emulate it and it still stands up, which is exactly what Perfect Dark does. Perfect Dark Zero, on the other hand, it does not. It came out in 2005, but it may as well be 1995. This thing is a prequel set in the futuristic year of 2020, lol, where the world is controlled by corporations, just like the real 2020. Just like the first game, the two big players are the two corporations Datadyne and the Carrington Institute, who Joanna eventually ends up working for in the first game.
Joanna Dark! Daniel Carrington wishes the pleasure of your company.
Being a little bit younger now, they've decided to redesign Joanna and now she looks like a backup dancer for Justin Timberlake or Kevin Federline. Doesn't even look like the same character. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing Joanna in a skin-tight leather outfit as much as the next man, but she looks like the most generic, mid-2000s basic bitch that I've ever seen. She looks like a rejected character design from SSX Tricky. She looks like she's about to text Nelly on a BlackBerry. It's a really classic example of movies and gaming from the 2000s where people tried to make something that appealed to everyone without it really appealing to anyone in particular. It's kind of like the Charlie's Angels Full Throttle of video game sequels, or the Escape from LA as opposed to Escape from New York. I also feel like they were trying to maybe copy the kind of tone that the Time Splitters games went for, but they just failed miserably. So the story is again about Joanna having to save the world from Datadyne, who are once again up to no good and started causing trouble in the neighborhood. Along with her dad, who gets into more trouble here than Mr. Magoo, she'll travel from China to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, Peru, and then finally Africa.
Shut up.
I do have to give praise where it's due though, and I think if nothing else, this is still a pretty good looking game, especially for the time. Some of the environments look pretty damn good, and this was one of the launch titles released for the Xbox 360. Definitely ended up being one of those next-gen looking games. There's some nice graphical effects with things like water and snow, and some of the lighting effects in the jungle levels look great. The second mission, you're in Hong Kong, tracking down some Triad enforcers, and you begin at the nearby harbour near a Triad nightclub, and it's a gorgeous backdrop. I know a lot of people had issues with the visuals because it looks like every surface is covered in baby oil, but I think it just makes the environments look a lot more vivid, so I don't really have an issue with it. In comparison to that though are some downright hideous character models that look like their faces have been stung by bees. I don't even know what's supposed to be going on with this guy. He doesn't even look human, he looks like one of those aliens from Mars Attacks.
No doubt.
On top of that, you've got some downright cringy voice acting. I mean, just listen to it.
You okay?
I could use an aspirin.
But the tribes of Earth grew jealous of their powers and turned on their gods. Their gods!
Shut up, or I drop you like a bad conversation.
Come on. What's it to you, old man?
Interrogate them, then dispose of their bodies.
Yes, mistress.
Their gods!
The music in this game is also kind of horrendous. Now, there are some nice tracks here and there. I kind of like the main menu music, which sounds pretty similar to some of the stuff from the first game. But most of this is poorly produced, crappy music with electric guitars and a shitty drum beat. And again, it just highlights how different tonally both of these games are. Compare this track from Perfect Dark Zero. Now to this one from the original game. Controlling Joanna is an absolute pain in the ass. She moves so slowly like she's wearing boots made out of concrete or something. And combine that with an extremely temperamental auto-aim system that only works half of the time and you're in for some horrid controls. It often feels like you're playing with some slight input delay or you're moving around underwater or something, because there's always this minor lag between when you press something on the controller and when you see it corresponding on screen. Now apparently there was an update for the game on the Xbox One that addressed this, but there doesn't seem to be one for people playing it on the 360. They've added in a cover system now too, where if you stand near a surface for long enough, you can go into cover and the game goes into a third-person view to let you shoot at enemies from safety. The thing is though, this is rarely needed, and the fact that you're bolted down when you do this, you can't even move up and down cover like in, you know, every single other cover-based shooter ever made, makes this just a cumbersome mechanic. Then there's a combat roll as well, where if you press the left bumper, Joanna's going to do a fancy looking somersault, which throws off the AI's aim for a couple of seconds. Overall, the shooting just kind of feels like hot farts. I do kind of like how shooting enemies with body armor is going to cause their armor to break apart and shatter. And I think returning weapons like the CMP-150 and the Dragon Assault Rifle are still awesome to use. Those few moments when you get the shotgun and can just destroy people at close range is pretty fun, even if the game lacks any kind of real blood or violence, instead just launching enemies into the air like complete ragdolls.
Girls busting cat!
But the enemies just feel and look so generic and boring. They often just kind of stand still in one place, firing at you, in between randomly sliding back and forth in a vain attempt to fool us into thinking they've got any kind of intelligence. I mean, look at these assholes here, just coming into the door one after the other like fucking lemmings. And a lot of the time these guys just seem to soak up bullets without going down. Like I lost count of the amount of times I emptied an entire magazine into someone and they just kept coming. Headshots often aren't even instant kills because enemies wear helmets which can sustain multiple hits, so yeah, that's fun. The most underdeveloped feature of the game though, I think, is the stealth system, which hasn't even been improved upon from the last game. There's never any indication of how far ahead an enemy can see, like if you're in their line of sight or anything. If you're unlucky enough for them to trip an alarm off, you can expect to hear that head-splitting siren sound until you manage to find it and turn it off. For some reason now there's a weapon limit too, which becomes incredibly clunky during combat when you're trying to swap weapons in or out, because the same button to cycle through guns is the same button to swap out with a weapon on the ground. And on top of that, they've removed the original game's health system and included one that has health regeneration, to a point anyway. This kind of often ties into how bad the level design is. I mean, this often feels like a game made back in 2000, and I don't mean that in a good throwback, nostalgic kind of way.
You always did like fireworks, Joe.
They've even got these arrows that you can see on the ground that guide you to where you've got to go next if you're taking too long, which I don't know if they've included to try to help players out or if they've just done it to try to bypass how terrible the level design is. Each level is just one boring sequence after the other, and some of them are just completely out of left field. During one mission when Joanna is supposed to be sneaking into some kind of laboratory, she instead gets goaded into competing into some kind of life or death VR match against the daughter of the man she's trying to steal information from. As you fight her in this tiny arena as Chinese statues come to life and chase after you. You can't make this shit up. Then she just goes on to the secret lab like right after. Like no one stopped to check her out or seemed to give her any thought after that. And it leads into this cinematic that copies a similar scene from the original game.
Didn't anybody tell you? Smoking kills.
What?
One level opens up with a boss fight against two dudes dressed up like outlaws that then plays out like the fight against Revolver Ocelot in Metal Gear Solid 3. I mean, it's so odd. People used to say that Perfect Dark was just like a futuristic female version of James Bond, and yeah, this is still James Bond, I guess. It's just instead of it being Goldfinger or From Russia with Love, it's now Die Another Day. It's the campiest, goofiest spy shit you're ever gonna see. The jungle mission is one of the worst things ever designed by another human being. You've got to shoot your way through this thick, dense jungle, a jungle that's entirely cosmetic because it does absolutely nothing to conceal you or give you cover. Thankfully, you've got a P90 with a thermal scope that highlights enemies through the bush, but still, that won't stop these guys from throwing grenades at you that detonate in your face pretty much instantly. Kinda reminds me of playing through the Colombian missions from Soldier of Fortune 2. After that, it's even worse. You've got to rush through this temple to stop a rocket from launching, and you're under a time limit. Just how much time do you have? Well, I've got no idea because the game doesn't even bother to give you some kind of countdown. This honestly feels like some kind of challenge map or something, like some kind of side mode that you'd unlock after finishing the main game. It doesn't feel like a proper campaign mission.
Shut up!
The second last mission in the game is pretty standard filler kind of stuff. It's just you against literally a couple of hundred enemies, having to force your way across this bridge to storm the enemy base. And I'm not exaggerating when I say you honestly have to shoot through hundreds of enemies on this level. If it wasn't hundreds, well, sure fucking felt like it. To be fair though, the campaign does have its moments. I think the bit when you hijack the hovercraft and your old man hops on the back manning the rocket launcher was pretty damn sweet. One of the later missions, you're in an underwater base shooting dudes with the laptop gun, and it felt a lot like that similar mission from the first game where you teamed up with Elvis the Alien. But it's like every time there's something fun or mildly enjoyable in this game, it's instantly ruined right after it by something else that's 10 times as horrid. It's like ordering a nice meal at a restaurant and the waiter keeps coming over to your table and farting on your plate constantly. You can taste the food in there somewhere, it's just covered by a thick layer of fart gas. You know what, that's a gross analogy, I apologise. I think what I hate the most about this campaign is the sheer amount of escort missions. It seems like every second mission you have to escort someone through the level. And if these guys ever get killed, more often than not, it's a mission restart. Most of the time it's your dad that you've got to watch out for, and this reckless asshole just runs out into combat like a complete idiot, often getting gunned down in seconds. Even late game missions, you're still having to defend NPCs and make sure they don't walk into a wall of bullets. Even if it's not an NPC, it's inanimate objects, like when your chopper crashes in the jungles of South America. You've got to defend it against waves of bad guys at the start of the mission. I mean, you spend as much time worrying about the well-being of a piece of machinery as you do your own. Now, I don't really mind escort quests or working with other NPCs, but at least give me the option to control them. If I could press a button on the controller to make them hang back while I go forward and make sure the area is clear, well, that'd be fine. But they give you no control over these tunnel vision having dickheads, who just run right out into the middle of a football field sized environment where for the enemies it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's even more annoying when they run right in front of you while you're shooting at an enemy. It's like playing GoldenEye all over again and escorting Natalia. This is why I think I hate this campaign so much, because it's like they've learned nothing from the first game. They haven't built upon the formula, they've just carried it across, and in a lot of ways they've made it worse. It's just such an incredibly archaic approach to level design, and it might have been fine back in 2000 when the first game came out, but in 2005 when this thing hit the scene, it's just horribly antiquated. You know what else is antiquated? Checkpoints, or the lack thereof. Yeah, like the original game, Perfect Dark is an absolute miser when it comes to checkpoints. I guess at least this time you actually get them though, so it is an improvement, but you only still get one per level. Some levels you're required just to play through the entire thing, often 15 or 20 minutes without a single checkpoint in between. It's horse shit. Horse shit. So for whatever reason, Perfect Dark Zero didn't do all that well when it came out, and it pretty much killed off the entire franchise. Rare released Perfect Dark Remastered in 2010, which included high resolution textures, improved weapons and character models, but also a much more stable and solid frame rate. And I think it's the best way to play the original game, because the frame rate and the controls have been completely fixed here. An option to use the original visuals would have been nice though, kind of like what they did with the Halo Master Chief Collection, but I mean still, it keeps the gameplay exactly the same, so you can't really fault it in that regard. Still pains me to this day though that we never got a PC port for Perfect Dark, because with a mouse and a keyboard it really feels like the way this game was meant to be played. And it even stacks up really well with other shooters from the same time period. It's still certainly far better than Perfect Dark Zero and way more entertaining. I'd honestly say that I hated this game. The story wasn't interesting and listening to the soundtrack was like nails down a chalkboard. Now, I never got to play the multiplayer mode when it was at its peak, but I have had a few people insist it was pretty fun and somewhat softened the blow of how crappy the campaign was. But seeing as that community is all but non-existent now, it's even more of a reason to not waste your time with this thing. Generally, I find when people tell me ahead of time that a multiplayer mode for an old game like this is really good, it's often not. It almost comes from people who played the game in its heyday, and I doubt many of them have played it in years because the multiplayer, it really isn't that good either. Ignoring the map design and any of that kind of stuff, like the single player, it's also an absolute chore to control. The FOV is so low that you often miss someone walking past you entirely because your peripheral vision is so limited. The movement and reload speeds take so long that it's like you're moving around in slow motion. And the time to kill is ludicrous, that unless you're aiming exclusively for the head, you can expect to burn through magazines of ammo trying to put someone down. And it's not like it was even good for its time either. We had far superior multiplayer shooters at the time, like Call of Duty 2, Counter-Strike Source, and Halo 2. Even on the consoles, Time Splitter's multiplayer component shits all over this. The customization aspect is a definite positive, like being able to customize the size of all the maps, the weapon loadouts and all that, but this is just so unfun. I'd rather pluck the hairs out of my balls with the toes of an echidna than play this. I guess I'm just so used to multiplayer games, like, you know, not controlling like a shopping trolley covered in sheep piss, that I just can't find any kind of enjoyment in something as old as this anymore. I'm sorry. At one point, I almost threw my controller into the goddamn wall in anger, at a speed and force that would have turned it into dust. So look, if you had fun with this as a kid, well, bully for you, but playing it in 2020, that's not quite the case.
Kill traffic!
I guess my point is that if you're banking on the multiplayer mode as being the game's one saving grace, well, unless you like playing against lifeless AI with controls and map design that's going to want to make you puke, well, this ain't it, Chief. I'd be keen to retry this someday on a 360 emulator with a mouse and keyboard, but as it is, playing it on the 360 as Rare intended, time has been one cruel mistress. I don't think this should be the end of Joanna Dark, and we've had plenty of remakes and reboots in recent years, so the timing is right if they ever want to bring it back. For God's sake though, if you guys do, please try to learn from your mistakes and also get rid of the highlights in her hair. You can keep the skin-tight leather bodysuit though.
Shut up.